Hello, Lacrosse fans, and welcome to another episode of Canadian Lax Weekly on the Lacrosse Radio Network and in lacrossewetrust.com. My name is James Tessier. As always, I'm your host for this all-Canadian lacrosse hour. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the NLL action that took place on Saturday, just a few days ago. Of course, we're in the playoffs. It is the finals, conference finals, and we had a all-Canadian matchup in the West between Calgary and Edmonton. And of course, we look for only the Canadian content in all lacrosse leagues. So Calgary and Edmonton are on our agenda today. We're also going to look at a little bit of Junior A lacrosse. The Ontario Junior A lacrosse season started this past week, as well as Team Canada. The roster for Team Canada was released for the 2014 World Championship, and we'll be talking about that. And I'll give you my thoughts about the roster and going into that World Championship. But first, we're going to start with the NLL. Saturday night, we had the two East final games, or conference final games, the East final. Rochester and Buffalo played game one of their two-game set, and Calgary and Edmonton played game one of their two-game set. Calgary won another game in dramatic fashion, a 12-11 overtime victory against the very powerful Edmonton Rush. This was a big game in front of a big crowd. I believe it was 13,000, almost 14,000 people at the Saddle Dome. Of course, Calgary hosted game one. Edmonton will host game two. Jeff Shattler played hero in this one. As you remember, Evans played hero in the previous playoff game. But Shattler, it was his turn to play hero in this overtime game, scoring 40 seconds into overtime to pull off the victory. It was a strange game for Calgary, I think. Slow start. They scored first. 3 minutes into the first quarter, they scored first, and that was a Scott Ranger goal. But for the rest of the first quarter and into the second quarter, it was all Edmonton. They scored 5 straight goals, and they were leading 5-1 into the second period. Second quarter. But the Roughnecks, they started chipping away all game long. It was a really good effort by Calgary to battle back. They were able to pull within two, a 7-5 deficit going into halftime. So they closed that 4-goal gap to 2. In the third quarter, the Roughnecks were a lot better. They had 4 more goals on Mr. Aaron Bold, of course, goaltender for the Rush. And Mike Poulin really came out in that second half, looking to help his team out, and he only allowed 1 goal in that third quarter. So it allowed Calgary to come within 1 goal by the end of the third quarter. So in the fourth, they come within 1 by the end of the fourth quarter, and Calgary has an empty net. It looks like Edmonton will be able to run it out, but they get a illegal substitution penalty. Very bad error on their part. A substitution error giving Calgary the power play. And as I mentioned last week in their matchup, their first playoff matchup against Colorado, Calgary special teams are phenomenal. 55% power play on the season, regular season. So with that power play to tie the game and send it to overtime, Mr. Curtis Dixon made no mistake as he scored the game-tying goal to send it to overtime. Overtime was strange. A couple of weird plays. Primarily Edmonton believing that they had won the game on a goal, in quotation marks, by Matthews as he was falling into the crease, and he bounced one through Poulin's legs. But the goal was reviewed and it was waved off due to a crease violation, as Matthews' hand just touched down in the crease just before the ball came out of his stick, and it became Calgary possession. And on that possession, Schattler took full advantage. It was actually a broken play off of the wall. He lost it in the corner, was able to get it back, drove the net, put a shot wide. The shot ricocheted off the end boards, up over the net, and he's able to leap across the crease, take it out of midair, and put it in short side on Aaron Bold to win the game. Really, very nice goal. So that was the quick highlights of that game. We'll get a little more in-depth with it now. Look at the stats, look at the keys to that game, to Calgary's victory of Game 1 in the West Final. I don't have the replay from last week, but on last week's show, I don't want to take too much credit, but I did say that I think Calgary had a really good chance at taking Edmonton out in Game 1. I was just looking. I know the reputation of Edmonton. I've seen them enough. But looking at the numbers, looking at the players, looking at the performance of their first playoff game, like I said, I always like the team who's game ready, who's not sitting around like Edmonton was, who played a very hard, intense game against Colorado and won in overtime. I favor that team. So Calgary had a overtime game previous week against Colorado. Sean Evans was the hero in that one. And like last week I said, I think that they have a very good overall team and they can pull it out. Of course, it's only Game 1. Edmonton has a game to respond, and then a 10-minute mini game after that to win this series. But I still think this game shows Calgary's tenacity, their willingness to come back in games. Just looking at the numbers, they were outshot 56-40 by Edmonton. They were outshot in every single quarter. Very, very funny stat where Calgary scored the first goal 3 minutes in, like I said. From there, Edmonton had a 5-1 lead in the second. 2 minutes in the second quarter, Mark Matthews scored, made it 5-1. At that point, it looks like Edmonton's game to lose. And Calgary, I think, recognized that, and they just jumped on them. They jumped on them, and through that second quarter and into the third quarter, where they tied it at 7-7, 7:20 into the third quarter, Edmonton got the tie. Now, they weren't able to lead for the entire rest of the game. They were able to hold on to that deadlock, tying all the way up from 7-7 to 8-8, 9-9, 10-10, 11-11. And the only other lead, well, not a lead because it was the goal to win the game, was the final goal of the game. So they scored the first goal of the game, they scored the last goal of the game, and it's a win. I find that kind of funny. A key to this game that I said last week, I think for Calgary, was discipline. Being able to stay out of the box, and by staying out of the box, allowing their offense to work, and as well have more chances on the power play than Edmonton, because of course their power play is in the regular season with 13% better. That's significant. Also, their penalty kill was a lot better, but they have a tendency to give a lot of penalty kill chances give up a lot of penalty kill chances, and that in turn will give up goals. It just has to happen. In this game, they only took 3 penalties. It was 9 penalty minutes, but 3 penalties. And they took 4 penalties. I'm looking at the power play opportunities, but they took 4 penalties, 8 minutes, scored on 3 of them. And Edmonton took 3 and scored on 2. So both teams were quite disciplined, and both had good power plays. It was good that they were both pretty disciplined, because it looked like the power plays were rolling in that game, rolling very well. So as we look at the key players in that game, you look at Edmonton, I think 2, maybe 3 key players. Of course, Mark Matthews had a game. He had a hat trick, 4 assists, 7 points. So he had 3 goals on 15 shots. So he got his looks, put 3 of them away. Curtis Knight had a goal and 3 assists. He had 10 shots. And Zach Greer had 2 goals and an assist. So 3 players made an impact on that game. Robert Church had 2 goals. But if you look at the other side, you look at Calgary, they had a number of impact players. Sean Evans had a goal and 4 assists. Curtis Dixon had a hell of a game. 4 goals, 2 assists on 8 shots. 4 goals and 8 shots, 50% shooting. Jeff Shatler had 2 goals, 2 assists, of course, and the game winner. One of those 2 goals. Dan Dobie, a little bit quiet. He had 1 goal, 5 shots. But they had the supporting cast to make up for that. Another key to this game, which could have really hurt Calgary, it did, realistically, in this category, but not in the overall game, was face-offs. Calgary lost Jeff Snyder in the previous playoff game against Colorado against his brother. He was facing off against his brother, got himself tied up and hurt himself. So it was not in this game. And because of it, Jerry Thompson of the Edmonton Rush was able to take advantage in the face-off circle with a 70% face-offs. Garrett McIntosh, Curtis Manning both helped in the face-off circle in the absence of Jeff Snyder. Garrett McIntosh, with the majority of 23 face-offs, he was a 35% face-off man. Curtis Manning had 4 opportunities, wasn't able to win any of the 4. So that was a significant player lost to Calgary that could have really hurt them. In the overall game, it ended up not hurting them that badly, but if Jeff Snyder isn't back by next game, you can probably bet that extra possession for Edmonton will hurt Calgary. I don't think they took full advantage of that opportunity in this game. Looking at Mike Poulin, goaltender for the Calgary Roughnecks, he was phenomenal in this game. Absolutely phenomenal. Faced 56 shots, made 45 saves. He was the first star of the game. Aaron Bold faced less shots, 28 saves. He faced 40 shots, but Mike Poulin with his 45 save night was very impressive. 11 goals against on 56 shots is very good, at least against an Edmonton Rush team who can score. Now, last week, I was also talking about how Calgary had the better offense in the regular season They had 17 more goals for. They had 237 to Edmonton's 220 goals for. But also pointed out how important the goals against was between these two teams. Calgary with 215 goals against, whereas Edmonton had 157. Huge gap between the teams in goals against. 157 goals against is very good, and that's why they finished first in the Western Conference. They had scorers. They were able to score, but 157 goals against is very good. And it was all part of a good defense and also Aaron Bold posting an 8.73 goals against average. 8.73 goals against average in the regular season. That's phenomenal. You look at Mike Poulin's goals against average in the regular season, 11.45. And he was just around that mark in this game, of course only giving up 11 goals. Aaron Bold gave up more than his goals against average for the season, leading me to suggest that he had an off game, or the defense had an off game as well. They should have been able, I think, to keep Calgary under 10 goals in this game. They gave them 2 power play goals, 3 power play opportunities, 2 power play goals. But I think Aaron Bold and the defense has to be better than they were in this game. If they're going to take Game 2, and Game 2 will take place this coming Friday, May 16th, 10 p.m. at the Rexall Place in Edmonton. Of course, Edmonton will host Game 2 as the higher seed. If Edmonton is to win that game and split the 2-game series, a 10-minute tiebreaker game will be played. And it will determine the winner of the playoff series and to see who will go to the Champions Cup final. Of course, on the other side is Buffalo and Rochester. Buffalo defeated Rochester in the first game by a score of 12-8. A little bit of an upset, I think, considering Rochester's dominance, 14-5 regular season record, where the Bandits hobbled into the playoffs with a 10-10 record. But like I said, for both Edmonton and Rochester, lucky for them, the series is 2 games and they have to split. So Friday, May 16th, 10 p.m., we'll have Game 2 of the Roughnecks and Edmonton Rush. And this game, I don't know, looking for Edmonton, I think the only way that they're going to beat Calgary is if their defense and Aaron Bold post the same numbers that they did in the regular season. 8.73 goals against, 791 save percentage. I think he needs to post those kind of numbers in this game, because Mike Poulin put up a phenomenal performance in this game, 11 goals on 56 shots, and the offense was able to produce enough. They were able to produce enough to beat out Edmonton, and that was even without Dan Dobie having a spectacular performance, but understandably, he was a target throughout the game. Second leading scorer, he had 90 points on the season, most goals, 51 goals. So of course he was a guy that Edmonton wanted to shut down, and they did. He only had 1 goal. But look to see Sean Evans, look to see Dan Dobie, Curtis Dixon, and Jeff Shatler. These guys are going to have a big game on Friday. They will. I'm not to say that Mark Matthews and Curtis Knight and all those Edmonton scorers aren't going to have a big game. Corey Conway had 4 assists in that game. but Aaron Bold needs to have those numbers like he did in the regular season, or else I think it's nighty-night for the Edmonton Rush. And I think Calgary, their perseverance, their ability to come back in games, get themselves back into a position to win, is going to take over. They seem to have that tenacity, that willingness to win, and it's shown in their 2 overtime victories in these playoffs. So I think Edmonton really has to be careful with this Calgary team. They got to watch themselves. So we'll look forward to that game 2. Of course, we're not going to go into the Eastern final. As those are 2 American teams, we don't need to look too deep into that. I'll just give you the score. And, I'll give you the second game for that. That's Saturday, May 17th, the following day from the Western Division Finals. Saturday, May 17th, Rochester will host Buffalo. And that will be at the Blue Cross Arena in Rochester, as they are the higher-ranked team, and they will host the second game. So we'll wait to see on Friday and Saturday, and next week we'll do it all again for those games. We'll give you the score, the analysis, and we'll look ahead to the Champions Cup final. And we know at least one Canadian team will be in that Champions Cup final, which is very good for Canadian lacrosse and very good for this radio program, as it gives us yet another segment to talk about. And we always love the NLL action. So let's get away from the NLL now, and we'll get into some international lacrosse news. Team Canada released their roster for this year's World Lacrosse Championship. It's got big names on it, of course. we have a vast amount of amazing lacrosse talent in Canada, of course. But to throw out a few key names in that list, Curtis Dixon from the Calgary Roughnecks. He's in the playoffs right now. As well as fellow teammate Jeff Snyder. I'm sure he'll be back from injury by then and ready to go. Playoff players from this season who've been eliminated. Of course, John Grant was in the playoffs and was eliminated. Dylan Ward on Colorado, his teammate on Colorado, was in the playoffs and was eliminated, as well as Cameron Holding, another Colorado player. Some of Curtis Dixon's teammates on Calgary. I mentioned him already, Jeff Snyder. Those are the 2 Calgary players. Edmonton has a few. Zach Greer, Kyle Rubish. Mark Matthews, of course. Just scanning the list. Can't believe I missed him. But Mark Matthews, of course. Also big names like Brody Merrill of Philadelphia. A guy who's been a staple of Team Canada for a while. Both Jason and Jeremy Noble. Like to see that. Rochester's Matt Vink. Adam Jones on Colorado. Toronto's Jesse Gamble. Angus Dineley, Philadelphia goaltender. So the list is stacked, of course. So much to choose from. Couple of interesting notes. Midfielder David Earl and defenseman Dylan Roy are on the team, and they were originally trying out for Team USA. They were in the tryout process for Team USA. I guess they figured they had a better shot at Team Canada, came over and got on this team, jumped right in. So we got some of those guys. A couple of notable players that aren't on the list include Jordan McBride, Jordan McIntosh, Chad Tutton, and Garrett Billings, who, of course, led the NLL in scoring at the time that he tore his ACL this season. 3 goaltenders, Dylan Ward, Angus Donnelly, and Brendan Donville. And Donville was the goalie, Team Canada's goalie at the under-19 a few summers ago in Finland. He's the backup for Cornell University. So just a little bit of what's what for that roster. Leading up to the World Lacrosse Championship, we'll have more analysis on the team, more analysis on the entire field of teams and the tournament in general. But enough of that for now. We'll wait until we get a little bit more meat to the news with the World Lacrosse Championship. But now we'll get into some junior lacrosse, Junior A, Ontario Junior A lacrosse. The season kicked off last Thursday on the 8th with a game between the Kitchener-Waterloo Braves and the St. Catharines Athletics. The Junior A season opened up with a Kitchener-Waterloo victory, 12-8 over the Athletics. And it was a strange game. Strange game, I mean the outcome. After last season, the Athletics had a poor season last year. In the bottom of the standings. Not the very bottom, but close. And it seemed like they were going to be better this year. And, of course, we know Kitchener-Waterloo lost our good friend, not good friend, but we know of him very well, Dane Smith of the Buffalo Bandits, who terrorized the league last season. So a Dane Smith-less Kitchener-Waterloo Braves were still able to pull out the victory and give themselves a very good start to this summer season. It looked like a penalty-filled affair. St. Catharines had 7 power play opportunities. Kitchener-Waterloo had 9, but it didn't seem like they were able to capitalize on all of them. St. Catharines went 1 for 7, so the power play wasn't working. And Kitchener-Waterloo went 3 for 9. Not bad, but 9 opportunities. I think they could work on the power play a little bit and boost those numbers. With the absence of Dane Smith, the likes of Chris Cloutier stepped up, had 4 goals. Davis Prince, 2 goals, 2 assists. Kyle Jackson, 3 goals, 3 assists. So a number of secondary scorers stepped up and helped out in the absence of former superstar Dane Smith. And St. Catharines really didn't have an answer offensively. They had a couple of 2-goal scorers, Ryan Dakin, Jordan DeMars, Adam Bellamy, a couple of 2-goal scorers, but not enough. They were outscored in the first 2 periods. The third period, St. Catharines won it 3-2, won the period, but wasn't enough. So a good start to the season for Kitchener. We'll see what happens with them as the season progresses, if they can deal with not having Mr. Dane Smith putting up 6 to 8 points per game and really driving that offense. The second game of the season took place the following night on Friday night, May 9th, just last Friday, at Ted Reeve Arena in Toronto, as the Toronto Beaches hosted the ever-dangerous Six Nations Arrows in Toronto for their home opener. Now I'll be able to talk a little bit more about this game as I was there, witnessed it firsthand, and it wasn't very pretty for the Toronto Beaches, and I'll explain why. Not just because of the score, which was Six Nations Arrows 15, Toronto Beaches 4. That's not just why it was ugly. That score is ugly in itself, but I'll explain in a moment. So 15-4, after a season last year that saw the Beaches improve, saw them have the most wins they've had in a number of years, and come only 3 points away from clinching their first playoff berth in a number of years. They're only 3 points away. And that was a season where they lost to the last place Mississauga Tomahawks in a very big upset in a game that they do not usually lose. They gave up 2 points and ended up biting them in the behind at the end of the season when they were just 3 small points away from clinching a playoff spot. So they had a lot of optimism after last season, much improved. Head coach Bruce Codd moved on to Orangeville. He went back home to his hometown, took the Junior B team in Orangeville, and assistant coach for the past 2 years, Merrick Thompson. Of course, you know Merrick Thompson from the NLL, the Philadelphia Wings superstar, former second overall pick in the NLL draft, Merrick Thompson. He took over the team. He was the assistant coach, but now he's head coach. He is the boss. And high expectations for the team this season with Merrick behind the bench. But not the start they wanted. Of course, you'll look at who they had, who in their right mind wants Six Nations for their home opener for the first game of the season. But lo and behold, the schedule makers made it so for the Toronto Beaches. But maybe it was all for the good of the season for Toronto, as they were missing a lot of players. A lot of players, 6 to be exact, and a number of key players for them. Of course, Six Nations was missing Johnny Powless. Johnny Powless is with Rochester Nighthawks in the playoffs at the moment, but he will be back, and he will play Junior A this season. So that could have been a lot worse for Toronto. But Johnny Powless is gone. Toronto also has players that are not there. Chad Levick and Ryan Lee, 2 players who were the top 2 scorers for the team last season in their first season with the team. As well as Alec Tullett, who was a rookie last season. Good defender, transition player for the Beach, good young player for that team. And he was absent. As well as their new super acquisition, Anthony Yoakum, who they got from the Mississauga Tomahawks, who is still away at university. And Yoakum is one of those players who they acquired to make an immediate impact. And as soon as he comes back, I believe he will put a jump start into that offense. And I think when they have all those players back, all those offensive pieces to add to their offensive pieces they have right now, I think they're going to do just fine. But let's talk about the game, and we'll talk about the team after. Six Nations, they weren't off to the greatest start for a team that was much better. Of course, Six Nations, they're always slick, always fast-moving. But it was 3-1 after the first period. Beaches held them to 3. Beaches scored first in this game. Held them to 3 in the first period. All was looking fairly good. until the second rolled around, and it seemed like Six Nations found their legs, and the Toronto Beaches, with a number of affiliated players and minor players from the Beaches Minor Association, weren't able to keep up anymore. Six Nations found their legs, but Toronto lost their legs, it seemed. Being outscored 6-2 in the second period, so they were down 9-3 going into the third. And in the third, it only got worse as Six Nations tagged on another 6, and the Beaches were only able to put another 1 in, past Don Alton, who made 36 saves on the day. So 15-4 was the final. And as I was talking about the lack of power play in the Kitchener-Waterloo-St. Catharines game, this game was ridiculous when it comes to the man advantage. There were 15 penalties handed out, 5 power play opportunities for Six Nations, 10 power play opportunities for the Toronto Beaches. 10. And they were only to capitalize on 1. Beaches had 1 power play goal on 10 opportunities. Their penalty kill was good. They held Six Nations to 0. They were 0 for 5 on the power play, Six Nations. But Toronto was 1 for 10. Just think about that. That's the difference between a 15-4 game and 15-8, 15-9, a more respectable score, less of a blowout, a little bit of a confidence builder, to not get blown up by Six Nations, which they normally don't at home in the last number of years. Home games against Six Nations have been generally pretty close. For some reason, Toronto finds their legs and they find a way to keep those games close. But this game just ran away from them. They didn't have an answer. They didn't have the full team to compete. So the power play was not working on either side. But 10 opportunities for the Beaches. That's rough. To only get 1 goal. So we'll look at some stats. The damage doers on Six Nations. Jordan Durston, 2 goals, 6 assists. Brendan Bomberry, 2 goals, 1 assist. Josh Johnson, 3 goals, 4 assists. Quinn Powless, 4 goals, 4 assists for 8 points. He was all over the place in this game. And Austin Stats, 2 goals. So those are the big names for Six Nations. On the Toronto Beaches side, second-year player for last year's first pick for the Beaches, Tanner Thompson, had 2 goals and an assist for 3 points. Captain Jordan Robertson had 1 goal and 2 assists for 3 points. And also a newcomer in a trade this past offseason, Garrett Lewis, former first overall pick by the Barrie Lakeshores, who was acquired this past offseason, had 2 assists in his Toronto Beaches debut. Also adding an assist was newcomer John St. John, who was acquired by the Beaches as well this past offseason. And I got a good look at John St. John while he played in CLAX for the Durham Turf Dogs. And he always looked very good in CLAX. His debut was not up to his standards, I don't think. He can do a lot better. He only had 1 assist, but, coming to a new team, I think he was away. I don't think he was able to get to many of the runs leading up to the start of the season, but once he gets in the groove of Coach Thompson's systems, I think he'll be just fine, especially with the amount of talent that's going to be around him when everyone comes back from school. Beach's goaltender Rance Vigneault was very good in this game. 15 goals against, but believe me, it could have been a lot worse. He made some big stops at some big times. He had 39 saves. He faced 54 shots. It could have been a lot worse if it weren't for Rance Vigneault, who was also very good for the Beaches last season. So, looking forward for this Beaches team, they have to get all their players back. It's very simple. They don't have the team right now to compete with the big dogs, a.k.a. Six Nations, Whitby, or Orangeville. But when they get a full roster back, they're going to have a nice, balanced offense. The defensive players can play defense. A lot of them had to play transition or offense in this game. But defensive players can play defense. Let the forwards play forward. Score some goals. They have a good goaltender in Ransavino. And like I've said, like many people have said, this season looks like the one that Toronto can finally get into the playoff picture again. But we'll see. Still a few days away from their next game. And we'll keep you updated on all the Junior A lacrosse news and games and scores each week. We'll go back and we'll look over the action of the week. But only 2 games over the weekend. Last week. It was Thursday, Friday games. But good start for Six Nations. Got the rust out against Toronto. Looked like a lot more than just getting the rust out, but that's what you do as an elite team. You take teams early on in the season and you just go all out. Get your game together, get some confidence up. And so when they play the next team, they're riding high and they're moving. So that's about it for this week. We went over the NLL, we went over Team Canada's roster, and we gave you a little bit of Junior A lacrosse news. For next week, we're going to talk about the results of those NLL Game 2s. Friday night, we have Calgary and Edmonton. Of course, don't miss it. Try not to miss it. Should be a very good game. And of course, if Edmonton wins, you'll get that extra 10 minutes to see who the champion is and who will go on to the Champions Cup final. Next week, we'll also talk about some new MSL news, Major Series Lacrosse. That season is approaching. I believe the first game is on May 23rd, so still 10 days away, but I think there's some new trade info that we are going to have to talk about next week, as well as by then there's probably going to be some more info that I not know of yet. And like I said, we're going to have some more Junior A action to talk about. So thank you for listening this week. We'll be back next week, Monday night, 6 p.m. That is the usual time. And you can listen to some more Canadian Lax Weekly with yours truly, James Tessier, on the Lacrosse Radio Network and in lacrossewetrust.com. Please visit inlacrossewetrust.com for all your lacrosse news. Everything you need to know from minor to junior to Canadian to women's to pros. Everything is in lacrossewetrust.com. Go there. Everything you need to know. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.